And in fact, it's been said many times in history, there's no time like unto our time, there's no day like unto our day. And so we hear very often today that we're in unprecedented times. But there are great differences. For instance, we notice in our own generations, especially the last few years, the last 50 years, each generation seems to be weaker than the one that came before it. And we are in times that have not ever been before. Then we go back to the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes was Solomon, the king of Israel, who was given the great wisdom, the wisdom of Solomon. And so it's called Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes, Solomon says that there is nothing new under the sun. And all the things that happen now have happened in the ages before. And all the things that you see here were all seen before. And it's interesting, and we're reading the book of Ecclesiastes now in the Holy Breviary. And today, the reading of the book of Solomon, Ecclesiastes says, there are two kinds of souls that are great fools. And these fools are living in vanity of vanities. And it's interesting, the two souls of which he speaks, we say that they are people of our day. In one of them he says, there's one man who looks at his belly, and he is not ready to work. And he is not willing to work. And he is a fool. He will eat his own flesh. He'll look down at his belly, eat his own flesh, and rather than putting two hands together to work, he will hold a half a hand full of grain. And this would be, he says, it's better to have a half a hand full of grain than to have worry and work. And so we find one kind of soul, which he says is a fool and is vain, or he is not willing to work. This is the kind of soul that doesn't see the purpose behind work. And this is when he says that he's not willing to work. He doesn't want to have the pain of work. He doesn't want to have the suffering of labor. He simply wants to live in a kind of pleasure, but he doesn't desire to be a multimillionaire. He doesn't desire to have the greatest of pleasure in this world or the greatest of palaces, etc. He is a fool, says Solomon. He just simply exists in the comfort of his own, having a little bit of something in his hand. In fact, many beggars are like this. Many beggars and many of the people amongst the poor are just simply satisfied as long as they don't have to put too much stress in their lives. Then the other fool, he says, is the same. He is the other side of the same vanity. And this is the man that is alone. The man that works alone. And he works without ceasing. And he takes no rest. But he is alone. And he always is looking to a mind of how he can gain more treasures. He is always busy. In fact, he is the common businessman and worker of our last 50 years who says he is the man that works 24/7. He is the one that's always busy, always chasing the dollar, always working at all times. But this is the same foolishness on the other side. For why does he labor, says King Solomon? So he is by himself. And he does not ask himself the question, why do I labor? He doesn't ask himself the question, why do I want to get rich? What is my goal? He just simply works without purpose. And so there are two sides of the same coin. The one fool who sees no purpose in work, and therefore he does nothing, and just simply is satisfied to eat and breathe, whether it be under a bridge, or in a small house, or in a ratty place. The other man sees no purpose of work, but he works without ceasing. And so Solomon says they are fools, and the number of fools is infinite. And they're all, so that we find both of these fools are very, very common in our time. These fools are everywhere. They are working, or they're angry at the others that are doing nothing. I remember once hearing an argument, or actually myself, one of my parishioners, hearing an argument of two beggars. Two beggars were complaining. They were complaining about a third beggar, because remember, whenever you're present, you always complain about the person that's absent. So the two beggars in the street saying, you know, John, that guy is worthless. That guy doesn't do anything for a living. He wants just total free handouts. But me, I'm a hard worker. Every day I get up and I go out to the street and I beg. I stand here and I beg. I do something. And so they argued amongst themselves. The one beggar, he just sat there and did nothing, and he expected money. The other beggar went to a different street and sat there and did nothing, and he also said that he wanted money, and they both argued about which one was more lazy. This is our age. We have an argument between fools. And the devil has created all kinds of false dichotomies, where one fool argues against the other. And in this fool and that fool are in fact two sides of the same coin. There is a lazy fool, and he doesn't work because he's lazy, and he just wants to take it easy. Then there's the hard-working fool, who works really hard and despises the lazy fool. But they are the same fool, because they don't know the purpose of work. And then we have the conservative fool and the liberal fool. The conservative fool, he wants to be as liberal as we were yesterday, and the liberal fool wants to be as liberal as we will be tomorrow. And both are judging from a day away. The liberal fool wants to be like tomorrow, and the conservative fool wants to be like yesterday, and they both are the same. Each of them fools. And the devil has created all levels of fools in every single aspect of our society today. So that there are fools on one side and fools on the other, and all have forgotten their purpose. Now we enter into the Catholic Church. There are the fools that say that we want to have, the battle is only about the Mass. Only about the Mass. So some fools will say, well, it doesn't matter whether you go to Mass or not. You don't need Mass. And other fools will say, no, you only need Mass. When in fact, there is only one thing necessary for salvation, and that is the faith, the living faith. And then Protestants took that and ripped the faith in part by saying faith is only a set of beliefs, but sacred Scripture says the just man lives by faith. Living faith is what is necessary. And that living faith means Mass. The living faith means confession. The living faith means the life of virtue. The living faith means rejection of all sin and all heresy and all vice. But what is necessary? Living faith. And the devil wants us to consider all kinds of false dichotomies. And so the devil, so Ecclesiastes, looking at men, sees that there are fools and there are fools. And they're the same fool. The lazy fool is the same as the hard-working fool. The lazy fool is the same as the hard-working fool because he's lazy because he doesn't see a reason to work. A hard-working fool is the same as a lazy fool because he works, but he has no reason. He's insane. Both are insane. And then, of course, also elsewhere, Ecclesiastes says, the one that does not labor, he should not eat. And so that both of them eat, and they should not eat. One should not eat because he works without purpose. He works only for himself, but he doesn't even know why he works for himself. The other should not eat because he doesn't work at all. And neither of them understands. And then also about the hard-working fool, Solomon says a few more things. He says, concerning the fool that works really hard and works only to himself, does he not know that when two men sleep, remember in the old days, you're going out, men would always travel together. So the two men would sleep together in the woods. And so if a criminal was to come, one would warn the other. If one was attacked, one would defend the other. And hence they would often travel together so that thieves would not come and take them, not come and take their things, or they would not be attacked or slain. And then also work together so that they would not be defrauded of their labor and wages. Because if one man worked by himself for a rich man, he may not be paid. But if 2 or 3 men worked together, they would go to the employer and say, you must pay us. And so therefore, when a man worked by himself, he would fall amongst robbers, fall by not getting paid as he should be paid, and fall in other ways. And so does he not know, says, does not the man who works by himself know? Not only does he not have a purpose for his work, but he is not stable in his work, because one day he will fall, and there will be no one to warn him, and who will pick him up? And if he is asleep and his things are stolen, who is going to warn him? One man must watch while the other man sleeps. The other man must watch while the first one sleeps, and so on. And so that he is a fool in multiple ways. The one is a fool because he's lazy. The other is a fool because he works really hard but without purpose. But then he realizes that even this is foolish, because when you work really hard and you have no one to help you, you will fall, and all that you work for shall be taken from you anyway. And we're seeing the second kind of fool is very, very common today. Both fools are very common in this present millennial generation, this present generation. Many young boys and young men coming up to be the age of 18, 20, 25 now, they look at the world around them and they see that their dad had a big house and he had a big car and he had a nice swimming pool, but they still lived in a broken home. They still lived a miserable life. And also they see that to get that costs $500,000, $1 million for a house. They can't afford it. So they say, I can't afford these things anyway. And they no longer have the ambition. They no longer have the ambition. Many of the older generation are noticing the young generation don't have ambition anymore. They don't want to go out and get rich. They're not willing to go out and work extra. They just simply want time off. They're willing to, after their second day at work, they don't show up anymore. And any obstacle, they quit. These are like the first fool. And these numbers of fools are infinite. And then there are the ones that hate them, and the ones that think they're lazy, and the ones that are angry at them. And these are the second fool. They take 2 and 3 jobs. And they make money, money, and money. And they work and work and work and work. But they have nothing other than work. We're seeing some of these fools now retiring. Because these fools are very common also in the older generation. Now they work for 30 years, they work for 40 years, and they've been out in the workplace and they made all kinds of money and they've worked 2 or 3 jobs and all they did was work and work and work. And during the time of their work, they didn't associate with the few children they did have. They didn't really take care of their wife or their husband on both sides now, because you got the working woman and the working man. And they have abandoned their duties of fatherhood, abandoned their duties of motherhood, and now they retire. They retire. And their children, the 1 or 2 they decided to have, are not with them. We see it all the time. For instance, these fools are in nursing homes all around us. You go to the nursing home, and most of the time you see no one visiting grandma or grandpa. And when they do visit, they come in and say, hi grandma, it's your birthday today. I gotta go grandma, bye, and they leave. When they're dying, we see now, for instance, they tell me in the hospitals, these fools who have worked and worked and worked alone. They have worked alone, even though they got married. Even though they had 1 or 2 children. They only worked for themselves. Why did they have the child? Because they felt a desire to have a child. Well, they felt that they weren't fulfilled without a child. And then why did they marry? Because, well, you know, they wanted a companion to be with them. And it was just one of the many things they did for themselves. And they never were really part of a community, even though they married. Now they're growing old. Now they're dying. And what are we seeing? You go into a hospital, and the waiting room is filled with people watching TV. And they're watching the TV, and the nurses tell me, it says, well, what happens to these fools? Well, the family comes and they say, tell us when grandma dies, because we're watching our favorite series on TV right now. Just tell us when grandma dies, let me know. And then also, I just did a funeral a couple months ago, and then the director told me, I can't tell you, I cannot count for you the number of people who don't go to their mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers' funerals because they have vacation planned. Said, I have a scheduled vacation, and just bury her, just bury them, just throw them in the ground. Send me the bill. I'm on vacation. And so these are the end result of the second kind of fool, and also the first. But particularly the second kind of fool that Solomon speaks of, they work very hard, but they are alone. They don't stand together. They think they are virtuous because they work, but in fact they are fools. These fools are infinite all around us. Hard workers who work 2 or 3 jobs, who believe that they are worth something because they are doing something, but they don't have a purpose for their work other than their own personal pleasure, and hence they're not much different than the lazy fool. The lazy fool realizes work is not pleasurable, and so therefore I'm not working. I'll just be lazy, and he only cares about himself. And the hard-working fool also only cares about himself, but he thinks he'll get more dignity, he'll get more respect, he'll feel better if he's working hard. But he's not working hard for anyone else. And he never asks the question, says King Solomon. He never asks the question, for what do I labor? Now this is something which is very common throughout the whole world today. We work, but for what do we labor? And then he says at the end of the consideration in the breviary today, for there is only, and then he is a greater fool, for he said, the poor man that is wise. is greater than the king who is wealthy and considers not the hereafter. What is it that the wise man must do? He must consider the hereafter, because we all know that we're going to die. The wise man dies and the fool dies. The king dies and the beggar dies. All the rich and the poor die, all die. And when they die, what do? They meet the judge, and they are going to live forever according to that judgment. And everyone knows this. This is one reason, for instance, why the fathers tell us, or rather the spiritual authors tell us, one reason why the busy man stays busy is to cover his conscience. Because he knows if he stops being busy, he begins to look into his conscience. The lazy man is too lazy to look into his conscience. So he's happy to just eat his little bit of bowl of rice or have his food every other day and then lay under a bridge. But the man who is busy, whenever he stops, he becomes agitated. He becomes very agitated because he sees his conscience. And he can't tolerate what he sees in his conscience. And not being able to tolerate what he sees in his conscience, he has to go and be busy again. And one day he won't be able to work anymore. One day he'll be alone. And we're seeing an increase amongst the elderly of these types. They are committing suicide. Right now in the United States, we're finding there was, from the last year or so, and very recently, the last maybe couple of years, report only came out a few months ago, that between the ages of 46 and 46 and 55, there's now the largest percentage of suicide between men between the ages of 46 and 54. And they said the reason for this, they're wondering why. Why is there such a massive increase of suicide of this group? Because this group of men, they've worked for the last 20, 25 years. They had one or two wives, they had one or two children, they are estranged and gone from all of them. They're still young enough where they can still function, but their bodies are beginning to break down. They're looking ahead to 30 more years of life, 20 more years of life, with no wife, with no children that have anything to do with them, and only work, and only TV, and only video games. Many of these people in this group are involved in video games and so on. And then and alcohol isn't doing the trick anymore, and drugs aren't doing the trick anymore, and so they are committing suicide. There's a massive increase of suicide amongst the older men, and also in the elderly, because they are living completely alone. Many of them are disgusted with their life, meeting people in their 60s and their 70s and their 80s, and they are completely alone. And why are they alone? Because they lived like the second fool. This second fool has been called the hero and the ideal man of the last 50 years, 100 years. The ideal man is the one, particularly in America, that you have to be the hard-working guy who's going to build something for yourself, work 2 jobs, work 3 jobs, continue to keep busy, build companies, work, and then you have done something with your life. And one day they can't work like they used to. And one day they begin to feel the emptiness of it. And they find that they are alone. This man, King Solomon writes about 1,000 years before Christ. There is nothing new under the sun. It's just that this man is now considered a very good man, a great man. And that if only he could turn himself to good things. But he doesn't turn himself to good things. If only he could take his labor and direct it towards heaven. If he could take his labor and direct it towards doing good for the poor. If he could take his labor and direct it towards the building up of the church. If he could take his labor and direct it towards any remotely good thing. But they cannot. As soon as they are not working for themselves, as soon as they don't see some immediate benefit for themselves, they are unable to work. And they immediately go into the state of depression. And they hold up all the things unto themselves. Generosity disappears from their heart. They are filled with bitterness. And when they grow old, they do not repent. And they do not change. Hence we see an increase in suicide. An increase in bitterness. An increase in violence. An increase in anger. And an emptiness and loneliness of the elderly. And now the elderly is coming down. Speaking also to other psychiatrists and to other men at the funeral, I say, one thing that's interesting about what's happening in the last 20 years. Old age is coming down. For instance, you would normally be around your family and people you know until you're about 70 years old. When you reach around 70 years old, then you'll find that most people you know in life happen to be living in the cemeteries. And the less people you know happen to be alive on this earth. And it's only by the time you get to the 70s that that begins to happen. But now it's happening at the age of 40. What used to happen at the age of 70 is now happening at 40. Why is this? Because now women won't have children when they're 15. They won't have children when they're 20. They won't have children even when they're 30. They have children when they're in their 30s. They have children older. So now when a child turns 20, mommy is 50, mommy is 60. That's the youngest child. When they turn that, and then when the mother dies, and the child is without his mother at the age of 30, then his father is dead. His mother is dead. He had only one brother or one sister. And now they have moved aside. And then, of course, things happen in many families, car accidents and cancer, and there's only then one, the brother dies, or the sister dies, and the one is by themselves, and they're 40 years old. They only had one child, or maybe two, and they're estranged, and they find themselves alone at the age of 40, alone at the age of 50. Now, in a normal society in which a mother and father had children, and they live for the purpose of children, and they live for the purpose of the continuation of the human race, the continuation of their own country, the continuation of the Catholic Church, the continuation of the faith, the continuation of civilization, and they're looking forward to the continuation of their civilization, looking forward to the continuation of their family, the continuation of the faith. These have 10 children, 15 children, and when they grow old, they are surrounded by grandchildren. When they grow old, they're surrounded by their children. And they are able to impart their wisdom and the experiences of their life to their great-grandchild in the living room. And someone brings them a cup of tea, and someone brings them milk, and someone brings them Ensure, and they stick it in their drink in some of their Ensure, and they then die in the living room with their families. Now, this is not happening. What's the next stage? The next stage is going to be the euthanasia stage. The next stage is going to be the stage in which will happen what happened in one example in Hurricane Katrina in the United States. I think it was in 2005 or whenever it was. In Louisiana, there was a nursing home that had 90 patients, but there was only one nurse on duty. The flood came and filled the nursing home up to about 3 feet of water. So about 1 meter of water filled up in the home. And the nurse left. 4 days later, the rescuers came to the home. Every single person in the home was dead. Now, what's interesting about that particular home, theoretically, those 90 patients had relatives. Most of them should have had relatives. Relatives should have known grandma, grandpa, great-grandma, great-grandpa, my uncle, my older brother, my older sister, is in a nursing home which is in flood over there. No one came to rescue them. Now, there were rescuers that came to many places. They got on boats. In fact, it was the first time in American history, in Hurricane Katrina, where the National Guard and the police came and they put a wall to block people from coming to rescue others. In fact, several people died in the football stadium there because the police put a wall. There were ambulances, there was food, there was medicine within 100 yards of the football stadium. In the football stadium, there were thousands of people, refugees, inside the stadium, and the National Guard would not let the medicine or the food pass, and 20 or 30 or 40 people died because of it. The food was there, the rescuers were there, and they were not allowed to pass. And so the soldiers and the government, for the first time in American history, instead of helping their fellow citizens, blocked them. They went and tried to drive people out of their homes and so on. And so that it was a kind of, I think it was an experimental situation. How are people going to react if we do these things? But those people in that nursing home all died. No family came. Where were they? In a normal situation, even if the police tried to block, you would get a boat, you would go across the water, you would go to the funeral home. Some one of those 90 went, they didn't. Now we're going to see in the next generation, or in the next few years, euthanasia and the death of these elderly is going to spread throughout the entire world, and there will not be a great reaction. There will not be a defense of the elderly. They will be killed. They will be eliminated. And in fact, before God, it will be just. And And before God will be just, because these souls live their lives as the second degree of fools. And here Solomon says, do you not know when you live alone? Do you not know when you live only for yourself, that one day you will fall? And when you fall, no one will pick you up. Hence you are a fool. And these fools are by the millions everywhere in the world today. And the result of these fools is that now they're all ready to fall by the millions all over the world. And no one will pick them up. And hence it says in sacred scripture that pray that your flight be not in winter. For if it is, it will be greater suffering, or on the Sabbath. For if it is, it will be greater suffering than ever has been since the beginning of the world. I believe myself that one of the reasons why the scripture speaks of the greatest suffering in flight is because the number of millions of souls that have no families and that are alone. In previous times, when your whole village got driven out, they were cousins, they were relatives, they were friends, they were neighbors, and although they went out to die, they had at least they were together with their wives, together with their children, and they tried to support each other on their way to death. And though they died in misery, they had at least the comfort of their loved ones with them and tried to have some support as they were dying. But in this next generation, when the death comes, when the destruction comes, when the economy collapses, when the food stops coming, everyone cares only for themselves. And the great majority of fools in the world today are either like the first fool, who doesn't care, or they're like the second fool, who also doesn't care. Either the lazy fool or the hard-working fool. And these fools are by the millions and millions and millions throughout the entire earth. These fools will eat each other alive. These fools will kill each other before the enemy can. Just like Flavius Josephus describes in the destruction of Jerusalem, he says the Roman soldiers were coming to kill a Jew. And a Jewish soldier was standing in front of a Roman, and he would die before the Roman could stab him because a fellow Jew stabbed him in the back. And sometimes the Roman soldier would come to fight a Jew, and the Jew would turn his back to the Roman soldier and immediately try to kill his fellow Jew before he died by the Roman hand. For they were more hated each other than they hated the Romans, and in the battle they killed each other. In the battle their hatred was for each other. And he said also, even the Romans could tell that this was a demonic battle. And this battle of Jerusalem was a sign of the end times. He says, when we fought, we did not hear the normal cries of war. For sometimes fighting against the Jews, they were given over to death, and they were filled with hatred, and they were silent. They were silent. They didn't cry out. They didn't scream. They didn't fight hard. And they all died. And the Romans could tell they had sieged many cities. They had laid waste to many cities. They had fought many battles, but there was none like the siege of Jerusalem. And so this behavior of the Jews in the city of Jerusalem is going to be like the behavior of the common man in battle, in the fight, when the time of the Antichrist comes. And we're in a time of the preparation for the Antichrist. And look at the wickedness of these souls. Another thing Flavius Josephus describes, it is said that there was, as the Jews were starving in the city, there was a woman who had a baby. And she took her baby up to the top of her house. And she held the baby and she ate her baby alive in the presence of the Jews. And the people walked by and they watched her eat her baby. And no one cared. No one tried to stop her. No one did anything. They just watched without care. And so was the behavior of the Jews in the time of that siege of Jerusalem. And now we're in an age where we know those hearts. For the heart of the lazy fool who will not lift his hand in order to be because he doesn't want to be uncomfortable, and the heart of the busy fool who cares only about himself, these hearts are hardened. And these hearts care not about anyone else. And these hearts will gladly watch another die and even participate if they think it's for their own benefit. These are the hearts of our age, and there is nothing new under the sun, as Solomon says. It's just that these number of the fools, and the number of the fools is still the same. Solomon says, these fools, their number is infinite. And so let's not follow the example of these fools, but rather of the wise, and prepare for the hereafter, and live the life of the gospel. It's the best way to prepare. Those Catholics who have many children, and those pagans who have many children, and those Protestants who have many children, and those idiots that have many children, They will be the ones who survive the upcoming chastisement and the upcoming difficulties. And those who don't, they shall have a great sorrow before them. We get to close it. God bless you all. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost.